Well, most of our clients, I feel, misdiagnose their exes as narcissistic when they're simply avoidant. Now, I'm actually going to pull from an article I wrote a few years ago when talking about how to truly spot a narcissist. So there's actually a difference between someone who simply has narcissistic tendencies and someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder. The fact that the term narcissist gets thrown around more than hashtag these days is kind of telling. The difference between having narcissistic tendencies and actually being a narcissist is the number of standard narcissistic tendencies that the subject displays. But who determines these standards? Well, that would be the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM. The 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders lists the same 9 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder as did the previous version published 19 years early. So these are the characteristics of narcissists. Number 1, they have a grandiose sense of self-importance. Number 2, they're preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Number 3, they believe that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high-status people or institutions. Number 4, they require excessive admiration, regularly fishes for compliments, and is highly susceptible to flattery. Number 5, has a sense of entitlement. Number 6, is interpersonally exploitative. Number 7, they lack empathy. They're unwilling, or I would add unable, to recognize or identify with feelings and needs of others. Number 8, they're often envious of others and believe that others are envious of them. Number 9, they're arrogant, haughty, rude, and abusive towards you. But perhaps the best way to differentiate an avoidant from a pure narcissist is by looking at the one major difference between the two graphics that I'm talking about. Remember, with the narcissistic abuse cycle, there are 4 main stages: the idealized stage, the devalue stage, the discard stage, and the hover stage. And with the avoidant death wheel, there are 8 main stages. I don't really want to go through them again. At a glance, these two graphics appear in lockstep, but there is one major difference. Generally, as an avoidant going through the death wheel graphic, they aren't going to exhibit the devalue stage in a harsh way. They'll simply become more distant towards the end of a relationship. So while it's true that almost every narcissist is going to have an insecure attachment, that what you typically find is that they're especially cruel during that devalue stage. So let me sum it up for you a bit better. If you put a narcissist in the death wheel graphic, your anxious side doesn't really trigger them in the same way it would an avoidant. Rather, they devalue you, they chew you up and spit you out, showing no empathy along the way. Now, this to me is where I think our community makes a mistake. They confuse narcissistic tendencies with narcissistic personality. This may sound kind of ridiculous, but if you actually look at the 9 characteristics of narcissists, you might look at them and think, I might actually exhibit a few of these. Well, newsflash, everyone does. I mean, who hasn't been preoccupied from time to time with fantasies of success or ideal love? It's human. Where I think the misunderstanding takes place is that a narcissist is going to exhibit most of the tendencies on that list. Most of us don't lack empathy. Narcissists do. Most of us don't act arrogantly. Narcissists do. There's often no negotiation with them when it comes to that list. And this leads us to the final point that I'd like to make. What's a secure way of handling a narcissist? Well, one of the reasons that I love attachment theory so much is due to the fact that it can serve as a guiding light to not only understanding why exes act a certain way or why people act a certain way, and that includes narcissists, but it also serves as a guiding light on how to handle them. So I'd actually like to point to the devalue stage because that's where the narcissist ends up doing the most damage. Not many people really know how to handle it. They think they do, but when it comes down to it and it's actually happening to them, they freeze up. Ultimately, the devalue stage in a relationship is the equivalent to a hostile response from an ex after a no-contact rule. The advice on how to handle narcissistic behavior and hostile responses is the same. Acknowledge the behavior, set a boundary, exit the conversation. I'll give you an example. Let's say that your ex texts you something incredibly rude, something that is in line with the devalue stage in the narcissistic abuse cycle. The correct way to respond to this kind of a text is, "It appears you are angry. I'm sorry you feel that way. However, I'm not going to allow you to speak to me that way." And then you leave the conversation. So you acknowledge the behavior. It appears you are angry. I'm sorry you feel that way. You create the boundary. I'm not going to allow you to speak to me that way. And then you exit the conversation. You actually exited the conversation. This simple formula only works if you can actually create the consequence of leaving. And that's the part everyone always messes up on. Narcissists tend to be drawn to people pleasers. And creating a consequence is a very un-people pleaser thing to do. But do it, you must.